I'm an escort to the supernatural. I think it's time I shared my stories. This one is about Hammond. My name is Lorelei. At least, that's what my clients call me. To them, it's seductive and mysterious, fitting the kind of woman they're paying for. My job? Escorting. But unlike most escorts, I cater to a particular clientele. People with unique conditions. You might call them supernatural. I call them medical anomalies. Take werewolves, for example. They're not the snarling beasts you see in horror flicks. It's hypertrichosis, a rare genetic disorder causing excessive hair growth. They live in constant discomfort, their bodies struggling to regulate temperature under all that fur. The so-called change is just an endocrine response to stress, paired with acute psychosis during full moons. Some of them come to me just to talk, needing someone who won't recoil at their appearance. Then there are the ghouls, who aren't rotting corpses but suffer from a rare condition called necrosis syndrome, a slow, painful deterioration of the flesh, often brought on by autoimmune disorders. They crave companionship because they've been cast out by everyone else. You'd think the smell would bother me, but after a while, you stop noticing. These encounters aren't normally sexual. They just want to be held by someone. Essential oils come in handy here. And the Fae? They're the most tragically human of all. Born with extreme albinism, their translucent skin and sensitivity to light have earned them their mythical reputation. It's heartbreaking, really. Their supposed allergy to iron is a misunderstanding of severe anemia that leaves them frail and bruised with the slightest touch. Each client has their struggles. They aren't creatures of legend. They're people with conditions the world doesn't understand. They're lonely, rejected by families, shunned by society, and labeled as monsters because it's easier than confronting the reality of their suffering. Then there's Hammond, the vampire. His clinical diagnosis would read something like this: erythropoietic protoporphyria, a rare blood disorder that makes sunlight a nightmare, leaving him blistered and burned within minutes. The pale complexion is part of it too, caused by low melanin and poor circulation. He insists he's a predator, but it's really just his body's inability to produce what he needs. He can't eat solid food without vomiting. Blood is his sole source of nutrients. Hammond would often remind me that creatures tend to die when you shove something through their heart or cut their head off. So that bit isn't exclusive to his kind. Supernatural beings tend to have unique tastes, though you might be surprised how mundane some of their desires are. They come to me for more than the usual reasons. Sometimes I think it's because I don't look at them like monsters. Other times, I wonder if they see me as something less than human myself. My work isn't glamorous, but it's meaningful in its own way. Even the supernatural, especially the supernatural, needs someone to see them for who they truly are. Hammond was one of my regulars. 5 months ago, I almost didn't make it out of one of our nights alive. The first time we met, Hammond explained his terms clearly. He paid well, tipped better, and required a little extra during our time together. By extra, he meant blood. But he wasn't savage about it. He didn't bite, as you might expect. Instead, he used an ornate little knife, thin and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, to make small cuts. He'd lap the blood directly from the wound, always careful to not take too much. I didn't ask questions. The money was good, and he was predictable in his peculiarities. That night was supposed to be no different. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of leather and the faint residue of incense. I leaned against the desk, wearing his favorite lace slip, waiting for him to finish his usual ritual of brooding.
"How long do I have you tonight?"
he asked, his voice soft but sharp, like a blade gliding over ice. "As long as you need," I purred. knowing good and well the cash would be there when we were done. The arrangement proceeded as always. Afterward, he reached for the knife and asked,
"May I?"
I nodded. It was routine by then. He made a small cut on my arm, just above the vein, and pressed his mouth to it, drinking slow and deliberate. I watched him, detached. It wasn't intimate, not really. To him, I was a resource. No different from the glasses of wine I left half drunk on the nightstand. But that night, something changed. Hammond's breathing quickened, and his grip on my arm tightened. The usual precision of his movements gave way to something erratic. I winced as the blade slipped deeper into my skin, pain flaring where there should have been nothing but the sting of a shallow cut. "Hammond," I said, tugging my arm. He didn't respond. His lips moved faster, pulling at the blood with the desperation I'd never seen him in before. His pupils dilated, the dark of his eyes swallowing the amber glow of the room. "Hammond, stop!" I said, louder this time. He growled, a deep, animalistic sound that made my stomach turn. The knife in his hand trembled as it slipped from the cut on my arm to my shoulder. He pressed harder, and the blade bit into flesh. Pain exploded through me. "Stop!" I screamed, shoving at him with everything I had, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. His hunger had taken control, and I was just a bleeding vessel in his grip. He growled again, pinned me against the desk as his lips latched onto the wound, drinking in frantic gulps. I felt my strength draining. The room blurred at the edges, the amber light dimming into shadow. "Please," I whispered, my voice faint. That word, please, seemed to pierce whatever frenzy had taken hold of him. Hammond froze, his lips still wet with blood, his wide, hungry eyes locking on mine. Slowly, he pulled away, staring at the deep gash he'd left, at the blood soaking my slip, at the lifeless way I sagged against the desk.
"Lorelei,"
he murmured, his voice trembling. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The darkness crept over me, and the last thing I saw was his horrified face as he scrambled to stop the bleeding he had caused. I woke up hours later in my own bed. Someone had stitched the wound and left the bottle of pills on the nightstand. No note, no explanation, just a promise that I wouldn't bleed out. I haven't seen Hammond since that night. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about him, the monster he tried so hard to suppress but ultimately couldn't control. And in the stillness of night, my fingers find the scar on my arm, tracing its path as I wonder if I'll ever trust another vampire to get that close again. But that's enough storytelling for one night. The memories are a little too raw to keep unpacking, and to be honest, I may have indulged in a glass or 3 of wine while writing this. Let's just say I'm too tipsy to keep my thoughts straight. My next client is Ulrich, a ridiculously handsome and absurdly hairy German werewolf. I'm sure his story will be quite the tale to tell, when I'm sober enough to do it justice. Until then, Lorelei. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that story. I love vampires, so I had fun narrating it. Special thank you to Rizzo for voicing Hammond as well. What do you all think the werewolf will be like? Comment below, and also subscribe for more stories like this. I'll see you next time.